I know I left Sandra and Morton. I think they're probably at the Democratic dinner still. They said they were making their way over. But I want to thank you for having me this evening as your guest speaker. I am New York City Councilmember Donovan Richards. This will actually be my 17th year at the City Council. Wow. 17 years. And elected 6 of them. So I didn't overrun term limits or anything. I don't want you to get any ideas. But an unfortunate incident actually led me to the council over a decade ago, well, almost 2 decades ago now. And that was the unfortunate demise of a childhood friend. I know it gets sad when I tell this story, but I had a childhood friend I grew up with in Southeast Queens, and he was murdered, unfortunately, at the age of 19 years old. And I'm this young man, I come home from school, I go to his funeral with my friends and was sobbing, and we just couldn't believe that he would leave us so early. He was such a good guy. And so that led me to a gun violence meeting, which was held by my predecessor, and then lo and behold, before you knew it, I was working for him for 10 years. 10 years at the council prior to being elected. In November to make actually 17 years. So it was an unfortunate incident, but it actually prepared me for these moments that we're in. And I've had the honor, as Jeff said, as chair of the Public Safety Committee recently. But when I got elected in 2013, I was appointed the chair of the Environmental Protection Committee. And one of the reasons that was important is because for those of you who don't know where I represent Laurelton, Rosedale, Springfield Gardens, and the Rockaways. Mm-hmm. So hence in 2012, when I was running for office, I could not go to people's doors and say, hey, I'm running for office in the Rockaways and parts of Rosedale, because their homes were underwater. Like they were literally digging their basements out, and it was horrific. So it was more, and these are people I knew going back for 10 years. My electricity was out for weeks, so you can imagine how that went. But we survived it, and by God's grace overcame it. But one of the reasons I lobbied to chair the Environmental Protection Committee was for that reason, but also because of the enormous infrastructure gaps that we had in Queens, period. I mean, you talk about regular slight rain, and you get flooded out. So I wanted to lobby for 2 reasons: to protect our coastal communities, of course, which was very important in the post-Sandy era, but also to ensure that the infrastructure that Queens was lacking for 30 or 40 years, there were pockets of Queens where homes were built, where buildings went up, and the city allowed developers to fill in all of this land and never put storm sewers in. Imagine it. So when it rains in people's basements, even in 2019. So out of that, and I'm just going to run through some quick things, and then I guess I can talk politics a little bit of what I will be up to. But just in terms of some accomplishments that we were able to secure as the chair of the Environmental Protection, then $2.2 billion for Queens. The largest tranche of money dedicated anywhere in New York City. We have more money being spent in infrastructure money in Queens than in any place in the city. And then to ensure that we protected the integrity of that money, we did something smart, because as a legislator, you can legislate to make sure that you track how the money is being spent, where it's being spent. So I passed a Queens Tracker bill, which mandates the city on an annual basis to report on where this money is spent, how they spent it, and they have to do that for the next 20 years. Yay! Yes. All right, so every year. And that report gets sent to community boards, it gets sent to the civics and the electeds. We also passed another bill that I co-sponsored actually with Councilmember Williams at the time, which mandated the city to clean out every catch basin in the city on an annual basis. They used to do it on a 3-year cycle. But one of the reasons we pushed them to do this is because, like many of you, I'm sure you had catch basins that the city never came and cleaned out, but you had to call 311. So now you shouldn't even have to call 311. They are mandated to clean out every catch basin in the city, but then to also report, once again, to the city council. There's a reporting requirement. DEP. Yeah, so I had oversight over DEP at that time. So that was a good mandate. And last year, I think they reached it, the first year the bill was enacted, an 80% rate. They look like they're moving closer to 100% cleanup this year. So we're moving in a good direction there. When you talk about renewable energy, we passed a bill which created the Office of Alternative Energy. So it's the first office in the Department of Buildings that's dedicated specifically to addressing issues around solar panels. So imagine you had a question about how to install solar panels on your home or your building. There was no place to go technically. There was no help desk. So we specifically created, as they made it, as we created that office. So that mandates, come on, Queen and the King have arrived. So this office specifically is in charge of renewable energy policy. And then I created the first environmental initiative in the city council. A 2.2 now, just last year became about a $2.1 million initiative. And that initiative specifically addresses green jobs, green education, and green jobs training and education. So many students across the borough and across the city now, we fund I think close to 100 organizations with this money that are out there educating our young people on the future, which is green roofs, how to install solar panels, what is the importance of the environment and protecting it. And then also the green jobs aspect, which is very important. And I'll get into why this initiative is so important specifically now. It's because I just passed a bill in the city council which mandates every building being built in New York City, 5 stories and under, residential, has to install solar panels on their roofs or wind turbines or green roofs. Now, why is that important? Because that is jobs. It's also good for the environment, but we're creating an environment for good jobs as well. So that's what we did. A few highlights. I also updated New York City's air code, which was the first time that was done since 1961, I believe. So we phased out what you would know, number 6 oil and also number 4 oil, which are the dirtiest oils which contribute to climate change. So I know sometimes, environment could get really, you gotta get into the weeds in it to understand it, but to make a long story short, it's good for Queens, it's good for the environment, it's good for the city. It reduces carbon emissions, which means that we reduce flooding and our children could have an earth that is worthy for them. I then went on to chair the zoning committee. So that gave me oversight over all housing, pretty much every housing project in the city. So any ULIP project, I sweat a little bit. I don't know if it's hot in here. Okay, I thought it was just me. Do you mind if I loosen up this time? Because I feel like I'm home. All right, good, okay. All right, got it. So I then chaired the zoning committee, which put me in charge of housing policy for the city council. So I, as you know, Mark Weprin went up to Albany. So that enabled, that left a vacancy for that specific committee, which he chaired, and then I was able to chair that committee. So that means every project, pretty much any ULIP project that needed to happen in New York City, it would have to come through my committee. I'll just highlight 3 big ULIP projects, which was East Midtown. So when you go to Grand Central Station, you'll see a lot of development happening around it. But we also, through that plan, also pushed to ensure that there was a lot of investment in transportation infrastructure in that project. So I think we ended up somewhere around $500 million that went into that specific project. Then we rezoned East New York, and for those of you who know East New York, it was an area that had a lot of disinvestment happening in it and a lot of challenges, and we passed about a $300 million plan. And then my own rezoning, which happened in downtown Far Rockaway. Everybody familiar with the Rockaways?
Yes, I do.
Who goes to the Rockaways?
I know the Rockaways.
All righty, good. Everybody knows the Rockaways now. If you don't know, you have to get to know. But there were a lot of challenges even prior to Sandy in the Rockaways. When you went to downtown Far Rockaway specifically, you had abandoned sites for 40 years. We had a Queens owner, Rita Stark, some of you may know her, God rest her soul. But for 40 years, she left abandoned buildings in downtown Far Rockaway. And we were able to use, through the power of the committee, push the mayor to allow me to use eminent domain on a lot of her vacant sites. And out of that, we were able to negotiate a very strong housing plan but also to correct a lot of the systematic issues that were happening in Far Rockaway. So, out of that plan, a new $40 million library for downtown Far Rockaway, $108 million for new infrastructure, which means we could fix the streets. We could put storm sewers in, $30 million for a plaza, $20 million for parks, $10 million for our local schools, and I'm proud to announce, even though Queens has its challenges with school seats, I also got a new school that's on the way too. So we've done all of that in about a 24-block catchment area in downtown Far Rockaway right now. Some other issues that I worked on closely, and I think it's important for our borough because I'm a homeowner like many of you, but we're dealing with a foreclosure crisis in the borough. And Queens continues to see a huge uptick in foreclosures. So I went down to Washington, D.C. With my colleague, Councilmember Miller, and we met with mayors, and we had other council members from around the country and governors, and we met with FHA and HUD. And out of that, we actually pushed the federal government, this is under the Obama administration, but it has continued under the Trump administration, surprisingly, this program, we did something called a foreclosure buyback program. So when you see foreclosed homes in certain neighborhoods, or we see that there's a senior living in the house and they can't afford their mortgage, they're in arrears, they may go into a lien sale, we are actually able to subsidize their mortgages right now. So we got the first pilot in the country, which is happening right here in Queens. Most people don't know about it. The first year, which is 2 years ago, we piloted about 40 homes in the city. That's actually 50 to 60 homes, some in the Bronx, majority in Queens. And we were able to turn those homes, especially that were foreclosed, over to local nonprofits rather than the big banks who speculate and drive up the prices, and then put those homes back on the market for affordable home ownership. I'm gonna take questions at the end. So that is the way that we start to bring down the foreclosure numbers in Queens. But then also from a prevention perspective, we also got, and out of that project, we secured about $10 to $12 million. So we got the city council to come up with about $2 million for that program. And then we also got some bank funds that were left over in the state, there was a bank settlement up in the state. We got $10 million from the state to put into that program. So it turned out to be a $12 million program. And I'm happy to say that it's continuing. We're actually looking to push for about close to $5 million in this budget in the council for that specific program. And then also we're still working with the feds, and also Letitia James' office as well is also contributing to that. So that is a big deal for us as we move forward in Queens, keeping people in their homes, keeping our neighborhoods vibrant. We know when homes get foreclosed on that squatters come in and ruins the quality of life in neighborhoods. Yes, and people do get squatter rights, by the way, it's real. We've had to work with the police department on that. Another big thing for me, and we have not moved as fast as I would like to see the city move on this, is fair share. So we hear about these homeless shelters that come up and how unjust and how certain neighborhoods are overburdened in the city. And in Queens, we do have a lot of shelters, and there are other boroughs, I won't say the Bronx, but other places that were not doing their fair share in this area. So I have a bill, and I passed a little bit over 30 pieces of legislation. This bill we're hoping is going to move in the near future, but it mandates the city to do studies before they place these institutions in neighborhoods, right? So when they talk about, we're gonna just put a homeless shelter in a neighborhood, they never take into account what is the infrastructure in the neighborhood? What does the transportation look like? What do the schools look like? All of the things that make a community. And a lot of times they dump, unfortunately, these individuals who are down on their luck in places that are secluded, and the city never comes up with a true plan to help them achieve upward mobility. So we have a bill which would mandate, and the good thing about this bill is that as soon as the city looks at a site, because often we find out about this a week before they're about to do it, right? But as soon as they think they're going to entertain a site, this bill mandates them to report that they're looking at a specific site in the neighborhood. So that gives us a lot more advance notice if the city was to look to do that. Just some other pieces of legislation I'm very proud of, and then I'll talk on public safety and sort of a quick vision of what I think and where we're going in Queens. I passed a bill last year. It's actually one of the best bills I think I've passed, because a lot of times our young people don't believe we are listening to them, especially in the foster care system. So I was engaged in something called the Foster Care Shadow Day, in which foster care, a young person in foster care will shadow me for the day. And I met this amazing young lady. She actually lived in my district. She was 16 years old, was graduating college at 16 in foster care. But she was telling me about all the challenges of moving from this foster home to that foster home, and how they wouldn't feed her and how they would take her allowance. So out of that, I passed a bill which mandates every child in foster care, 13 years and up, they receive a survey every year that they can fill out to talk about their experience in foster care. It mandated an annual report. Now, why was this important? Because it gives our foster care children a voice in the system, and then because that report is a public document, I just got yesterday just received the report, you can literally see the areas where they struggle, right? So 8% of them talked about they're still hungry at night. 8% of 13-year-olds and up and our foster care children talk about the need for that, the need for more educational services, the need for more mental health services. That was high on their list. So that's something I'm very proud of that I passed. And now I'll just move on. I'm the new chair of the Public Safety Committee. For those of you who don't know what that means I have oversight over the New York City Police Department, one of the toughest jobs, as Jeff said, I think in the council, because it is my job to balance the interest of the public, to make sure that the NYPD is working to keep our community safe, but to also push them to be better in areas that they can improve in. And we could all use improvement. If you ever think I can use improvement, please don't be shy to tell me. I want to know the truth. Under public safety, I'm happy to say I'm building the first new precinct in Queens. Probably, I can't remember the last time a precinct was built in Queens, but we are now building the new 116th precinct, which is going to be located in Rosedale in Queens. And we actually, the police commissioner testified before my committee yesterday. So we are going to be breaking ground at record speed. We just got secured 86 million, 70 million last year. The price is now inflated to 86 million this budget. So we put another 16 million in, and at the end of this year, we're going to do it with groundbreaking. And why is that important? Because the 105 precinct, if you know anything about it, they cover the same lane mileage from here to Boston. All right, that's how much lane mileage they cover. So a drive to Boston is equivalent of the roadways that they cover. It's a huge precinct. And because of that, they cannot service the community in a way, they can't service all communities in an equitable fashion, because they have to go, they're on the Cross Island Parkway this way, they gotta go to Southern Parkway this way, too many parkways. So we're gonna build the new 116 precinct, which I'm proud of, and that's gonna make sure that we improve our numbers here in Queens as well. I also have been doing a lot of work around hate crimes in the council as well. As you know, I don't have to say it, there's been a huge uptick. We had a rally, I think, up the block from here about a month ago, a little bit, because there's been a huge uptick in hate crimes. And, for some reason, there are a lot of people out there that feel emboldened now to attack our Jewish brothers and sisters, to attack African Americans, to attack those in the LGBTQ community. So yesterday we were actually pushing the commissioner to come up with more money for that specific unit, in which they agreed on. I think that we're going to see more staffing in that specific unit to address more of the hate crime issues, because we need to send a strong message that it's unacceptable in New York City to attack people based on their race or their religion or their gender identity. And we also passed out of that a historic piece of legislation with my colleague Chaim Deutsch, who's out of Brooklyn, which creates the first office to prevent hate crimes, I think, in the country. So we're seeing that office is going to come into play. And that office is tasked with several things. It's tasked with going into our schools, schools, which is important, educating our young people so the next generation could be better than us. But two, they'll be tasked with also tracking hate crimes, working with the NYPD, making sure that we are focusing in on, there is a 60% increase in hate crimes this year, all right? 60% increase from last year. So it's a big issue. We're continuing to do work there. The SVD unit, I know you spoke of, abortions, and we're seeing rapes go up still. Sexual violence, sexual assaults are going up in the city now for several reasons. And when it goes up, it's not necessarily a bad thing because that means more people are reporting. So we want people to report. I think it says something about maybe, 5% of individuals who are sexually assaulted report in New York City. So we need to make sure that those numbers go up so we can hold those predators accountable. We've done a lot of work. We pushed the NYPD because they were not investigating these crimes the way they were supposed to. They weren't bringing women and men alike to facilities that were worthy of those individuals who went through issues or who were raped or sexually assaulted or harassed. And we got the city to finally agree to build 5 new facilities. Queens will get a new facility as well to do interviews. They were bringing people into these decrepit conditions to interview them. And what makes it worse is some of the places they were bringing them, if they brought them in their neighborhood and say the person who did his friend walked into the precinct in handcuffs, they would be interviewing them in plain sight of other people. There was no privacy. So someone could hypothetically say, I saw Millie or whomever in the precinct being interviewed, and that could cause an issue in the house, especially around domestic violence as well. All right? So we're gonna build 5 new facilities. Manhattan is moving. Queens, we are scoping for a new site now to do interviews to make sure that that's better. And then we also pushed the detectives unit, the SVD unit. For those of you who watch Law and Order, you know about this unit. So we pushed them to hire up more detectives because there was a shortage of detectives, but there was a huge increase in these crimes. Then to make matters worse, there was a backlog of thousands of cases that were never investigated. Thousands of cases that were not investigated. So we pushed them, and I think we got about an additional 102 detectives in that unit now. We're continuing to do work there to make sure that we can hold the NYPD accountable, but more importantly, for those who report, we want them to be treated with dignity and respect. So that's what we did there. I'll talk about EDPs. I know we've seen a huge uptick of people on the streets who you would deem who have emotional issues, challenges. So we've been working very closely because this is not a policing issue, and I agree with the police commissioner on this. Too many times these issues land on the laps of the NYPD, but there's societal issues. If someone's not taking their medicine, if they're not getting the mental health services in their community, the city needs to take some blame for that. We need to make sure we're reaching people from here to here when they need mental health services. So we now are in the process of reforming the way the NYPD addresses what we call EDPs, those with mental health needs. And it was just a killing. I just got brought into One Police Plaza, unfortunately, to see the video of a young man who unfortunately was killed, I believe in the Bronx. And when I reviewed that video with NYPD, you can clearly see this was an individual who had mental health issues. And unfortunately, he did not respond, in the appropriate way. He had a knife, and unfortunately, he came in a menacing fashion, and unfortunately, he met his demise. But what could we have done as a city to address that issue? Could we have done something to intercede before he reached that specific level? So we are looking at, in this budget, and it's on the mayor's desk now, I know he's now number 23. We'll see some movement here. But we're looking at reforming. We don't want the NYPD necessarily to be the first responders to some of these issues, unless it's a violent person. We want social workers. So we now have a pilot in Staten Island that where social workers are literally, if you call about an EDP, they hop in the car, and what you would call a sector car, with the police department, and they actually are with the police department as they respond. So we all have someone in our family, I'm sure, who has had a mental health issue. We want them to be dealt with in a delicate fashion. So we are looking to really make sure that the NYPD does that, and then also to ensure that we can build out more mental health services across the city, which is important, so that we can track these individuals, we can ensure that if they need to take their medication, they can, and we don't have to see them sleeping on a train, right? I mean, if you take the train, you see it every day, right? So we want to make sure we're getting those individuals the help they need. So those are some things there. Body camera program has rolled out, it's going good. Every New York City Police Department patrol officer has a body camera now, 36,000 officers. So that is relatively going well. And it helps to make sure that we can protect our officers if people file false reports on them, but we also, it enables us to protect the public as well in case an encounter doesn't go in a positive way. So those are just some highlights of things. I mean, I could speak all night of things we are working on. Education, we put 50 million into our schools. Parks, I put close to probably, I got the mayor to give up 400 million for the Rockaways. And then outside of that, you know, we've been able to fund a lot of parks. So we have about $500 million in park money in our district right now. And we want to make sure we can continue to bring that vision to Queens. So Donovan Richards is going to run for Queens Borough President. So if you didn't know that, no. And I just want to run down some quick ideas, if that's okay? Yeah. Alrighty. So, you know, Queens is not getting its fair share. You know, when you look at the borough and you look at how Brooklyn is doing, you stack up against Manhattan, you stack up against Staten Island and the Bronx. When you talk about school seats, when you speak about infrastructure, when you talk about parks, when you talk about quality of life, we are not keeping up with pace with the rest of the boroughs. Housing as well, you know, we have a homeless crisis. A lot of people are entering the system from Queens as well, which means that we're not developing moderate and middle. There are individuals, this is a sad fact. There are people who work in the NYPD civilians who are living in homeless shelters. That lets you know we are failing as a city to make sure that we are protecting working families. That's a big problem. People working for the city living in homeless shelters. Something is wrong. So when we talk about fair share, we need to make sure that we are advocating at every facet. We're watching those numbers, and I'm not saying that the current borough president hasn't fought, she's fought, but we're gonna need a strong continuation of that. I showed I could bring the bacon home. I wanna bring it home for the borough. So fair share, really making that argument to City Hall, advocating, that's the first thing we need to do as a borough. To make sure that those school seat shortages that we're seeing, we're really pushing for that. Our libraries, all of these things, we are just falling behind. As our borough becomes more popular, we're seeing a lot of growth here, but the problem is we're not keeping up with that growth in terms of infrastructure. Just some other quick ideas I have. So I'm working on, and home ownership is a big piece of this. I am really afraid that our next generation is not going to be able to be homeowners. When you look at millennials in particular, they are not making the salaries, everything is going up, homes are going up to $800,000. Listen, I'm happy when my property value goes up, but I also understand that it's largely creating a gap that the next generation won't be able to fill. So I want to focus big on home ownership, and one way to do that is through a model called community land trust. I'm not going to go into all the specifics tonight because we'll be here all night, but there are other cities such as Vermont and other places where, let's imagine this is land, we hold on to the land, the community holds on to the land, then a home goes on it, and then we can subsidize the mortgage so that young families coming up could actually afford to live and pay the mortgage in those specific homes. The city, it's been a long fight to get them to recognize this new model of home ownership, because the city has largely, their policy has specifically focused on rentals. And rentals are good, But we have to ensure, like I said, that the next generation can own. So I passed legislation that mandates the city to now recognize community land trust as a model. It's now in the administrative code of the city of New York, so which means that we can now get the ball rolling. So last year, I think I secured about $100,000 through the city, through the speaker, to start the build out of it. This year, we're looking to push for about close to $1 million. We just rallied on City Hall steps today. We did a briefing with other council members from around New York City who all are now interested in community land trust. So that's gonna be a model I wanna replicate right here in Queens. We don't have it in Queens. There's only one community land trust in the city, that's in the Lower East Side, Cooper Square, if you know anything about that place. It's been a community land trust model since 1991. That's something I wanna bring here, where we can take speculation away from the market, which then enables the next generation, or you, or somebody in this room who may not be earning $100,000 or can't keep up with the pace of a mortgage, to actually stay in the community, but to also ensure that that speculation, you can grow equity in the home, but you're not able to, if you wanna go sell it, let's imagine the home is, you bought it for $250,000, you're not gonna be able to go out there and sell it for $1 million. So it allows you some flexibility to build equity, which is good, but the most important thing is that you can pass that home down to the next generation for them to own as well. Another thing I'm working on, my own dad migrated here from the West Indies probably 40 years ago, and he never became a citizen. So this year it was great to go to the Brooklyn Federal Courthouse. He became a citizen, ta-da, this year. I'm sure Trump had something to do with it, but he's finally become a citizen. And you know, in this borough, you gotta think about this, 200 languages spoken in this borough. It's unbelievable, the most diverse borough, but there are a lot of people living in the shadows because they are afraid to come out, they're afraid to speak up, they're afraid to get services, they're living in their little sections, they don't trust government. But one of the things I've been able to do, I got CUNY to come out and do free immigration clinics in my office. So CUNY is in my office right now. I also brought the Daily News and CUNY citizenship down to the Rockaways as well. We have a booming Latino population going up out there as well, 25% of the population. And literally, did you know, I mean, the consulates come, the Mexican consulate, you get your passport on the spot. You don't leave the school without getting your passport. You get it on the spot. So one of the things I envision for Queens Borough Hall is creating an immigration unit, a unit that really specifically is there to work on this issue. Maybe it moves around the boroughs, it moves into neighborhoods where we're seeing a lot of immigrants come in and they need the services and they're afraid, but I really envision the office really serving a broad range of people. Another thing I want to work on, and this pertains to zoning, and I know nobody wants big buildings going up in their neighborhoods everywhere. You know, we want to preserve the characters of our neighborhoods, but I do think we as a borough, we shouldn't allow City Hall to dictate to us what happens, but we as a borough should come together with planners, with the community boards, with our civic associations, to really navigate the zoning system, but to find opportunities. There are opportunities in my district, I know for sure, where we should do housing and do commercial and do community centers. And if you're gonna put a dent, let me remind you, 62,000 people living in homeless shelters tonight, half of them are children, all right? And it's not because their parents aren't working. These are working families living in homeless shelters. So we need to do our diligence, I think, as a borough to really locate those opportunities and do mixed income, you know, mixed income housing across the borough. So that's another idea I have. Safety is important. If you're looking at the numbers, Northern Queens has seen an uptick in crime. It has seen an uptick. You know, I want to put on my public safety hat for a minute. I think safety is important to everything we do, right? Everybody, no matter where you're at in this borough, where you're at in the city, wants a safe neighborhood. In every neighborhood you walk, you should feel safe. If we can't feel safe, you know, what's the point of building parks? What's the point? What's the point of adding amenities if we can't utilize them because we don't feel safe in this borough. So I want to continue my work, even though I would not be the public safety chair anymore, to really make sure that we are doing monthly meetings with the NYPD. We're bringing everybody around the table, the different community boards, the different precinct councils from all around, to make sure that we set a goal. I mean, it would be a goal for me, just as I said in the Rockaways, to cut shootings, to cut murders by over 60%. We achieved that in the Rockaways. You know, a place, especially in my part of the Rockaways, where you could have had 30 or 40 shootings a year. You know, last year I think we saw 4. You know, there were parts of my district where you could have saw, you know, you look at the numbers 30 years ago, you could have seen 30 murders at least. And I think we had maybe 2 or 3 last year. We went in some of the areas 480 days without shootings or murders, which is unheard of. So I want to do that, but also that requires the city to commit to hiring community organizers, as we did in the Rockaways. We got about $1 million initiative that put people to work, but they are out on the streets dealing with the individuals who are in the gangs, working with them, saying to them, okay, what do you need? Do you need housing? Do you need a job? How can we get you to put your gun down? And it's worked. 480 days in Edgemere, Queens, without a shooting is unheard of. And we accomplished that there because we put a lot of people to work as well, but that program specifically worked. I also want to push Queens towards 100% renewable energy. And I know that's a very bold and broad goal, but we can achieve it. Every development project that happens in my district, when they come, I say, okay, where are the solar panels going to be? Where are the wind turbines going to be? There's also newer technologies like geothermal technology. I know this stuff, it's a lot of things, but I've done, you know, a lot of work to make sure that we can look at modern technologies. So for instance, one building I did in the Rockaways, a geothermal building in which the earth naturally heats and cools the building, their heating bill is like $1 a year. All right? Like $1 a year. Yes. Believe it or not, we didn't always, as earthlings, have heaters and all these fancy things. Our ancestors didn't have any of this, but they figured it out. So there are different technologies out there that we should adapt to. Like I said, every building in my district that's coming up has a green roof, a solar panel, and this was minus me even passing my bill. We just mandated it, so we need to push towards that. We just defeated the Williams pipeline. The governor just announced that, anybody familiar with that? They were trying to build a pipeline through the Rockaways. And we thought that that was not the future of Queens, right? I mean, I've been to Pennsylvania and saw fracking from my own eyes. I got to visit where people lived and I saw how fracking impacted their lives, how their children couldn't even bathe in their homes. They had no fresh water because guess what? They had leaks, gas leaks coming up under their homes. Imagine seeing a newborn baby who doesn't have access to it. So I could not support that project in good conscience because we should be moving the state and the city towards renewable energy. There's also some other things going on here, LaGuardia and JFK. The governor has pumped $13 billion into JFK Airport. LaGuardia, whoever's the next borough president, is going to have stake in this. We have to make sure that our borough benefits immensely from this. We should not have people coming from New Jersey. No offense if you ever grew up in New Jersey or you know people in New Jersey. But New Yorkers and especially Queens residents should be the ones that benefit from these job opportunities. So we are going to fight, and we've done it. Every development project in my district, we mandate reporting. They have to report down to salary, down to zip code. We visit the site so we know people in the neighborhood are working. So we want to make sure that there's a continuum there. Transportation also, you know, how do we leverage these opportunities to also support what we have? I've just been appointed by the city to sit on the MTA's and the DOT's bus network advisory board. So I'll be at the first meeting next Friday. I believe it's a mayoral appointment. So I'll be representing the borough to a great degree in pushing for better bus service as well. I know that bus lanes you can't say put bus lanes in every neighborhood, but we should look at unique opportunities where we could with community input. And then lastly, let me touch on this, because I want to touch on Amazon for a second. And I think anyone who says that Amazon leaving was a good thing, it's misled. You know, we lost 25,000 jobs. We could afford, you know, there were individuals who said, well, those jobs weren't going to be resident jobs for residents of Queens. And they're sorely misguided, because leadership would ensure that people from the borough are hired. We don't use excuses in Queens. Now, I did not sign the original letter for one reason, because I truly do believe in what you would call community input. And I believe that anybody who wants to lead a borough or lead their community, not to say that people who signed the letter are bad, I'm not saying that, but you don't sign your name onto something before you know the facts of something. So when the mayor came to me and asked me to sign the letter, I said no. I wanted to know more about the jobs. I wanted to know more about infrastructure. I wanted to know more about the project. So you should never sign on in support of something without the details, and there were no details at that moment. I do think the governor and the mayor sorely lacked a true engagement, community engagement process. And for that reason, there rightfully was a lot of pushback. Anything that happens needs to have robust community engagement. Even if you don't get everybody to support something 100%, the point is that you did real engagement, and that sorely lacked in the plan. So I do see, you know, I don't believe that we should play a zero-sum game here in Queens. And, you know, I just wanted to put out there, because I'm not going to be shy about speaking about this. You know, when you talk about 27 billion lost in revenue a year, that's money that we could have pushed the state, if we were at the table in the city, to invest into some of the infrastructure right here in Queens. When we talk about better buses, we talk about better subways, we talk about better streets, you know. These are things we could have negotiated along the way. And not at the expense of the borough, not at the expense of the neighborhood, but a true defined plan, I think, could have got us a long way. There we could have had those strong partnerships with colleges as well. LaGuardia was one, York, Queens, really creating a pipeline of upward mobility, especially for our students in the next generation, so that they can own the homes that I spoke about earlier. So with that being said, I want to thank you. I know I've spoken a long time, but I wanted to come and briefly give you what we've been up to, where we think the future of Queens is going, and now I can take questions on any subject.
Yeah, Susan, go first.
Hi.
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 I'm a member of the Parks Committee of Community Board 8, and I just have a real simple question. How do we get more police, New York Police Department presence in Flushing Meadow, Corona Park?
So I know there's been, correct me if I'm wrong, there's been a push to get a satellite in there, right?
Yes.
And that's something I would be interested in talking about again. You know, like I said, I secured a precinct, so I think I could secure a satellite.
Yes.
You know, but I think a satellite, that's a huge park. It's actually one of the first parks. Actually, my parents were teenage parents. But I have so many fond memories in that park as a young man coming up. Pictures, matter of fact, with NYPD officers, believe it or not. I just sent the picture to the commissioner. I was like, look, I was hanging out with cops when I was like 7 in there. So I think the satellite is the real answer to that. I think there should be more of a presence. We also need more PEP officers, and we need to make sure that we are looking at ways to activate that park as well. You know, the more foot traffic you have in places, the safer it is. I went to Taiwan, actually. I was invited by the Taiwanese government earlier last year to come to Taiwan, and it's the safest city. It's one of the safest cities in the world. And when we met with their law enforcement, I asked, why is this place so safe? They said the number one reason it's safe is because there's eyes and ears on the ground nearly 24 hours, you know. So there's always somebody walking around, and you know, and I mean, their culture is a little different. They work like 20-hour days. Not that we don't either, but they work 20-hour days. They do their shopping at night. So there's always people on the ground. So I think for that park, looking at unique ways and looking at, you know, infrastructure. I mean, could we make sure we put Argus cameras in there? That can be something that also the deterrent to people who commit crimes in that park But I think the satellite should be what we focus on there.
Get on there, fast.
Hey, you're nice.
You got it.
Yep.
I'll be willing to work with you on that. Yes, ma'am.
What do you think of the jails being moved to the 5 boroughs instead of having Rikers rehabilitated?
It's a complicated discussion, but I'll say this, it goes back to that first conversation we had. If you don't start with community planning in the first place, you've already failed.
Right.
And I don't know anybody who wants a jail in their backyard. I mean, no one wants a jail in their backyard. I did visit Rikers Island, just to get a good sense of what the island looks like, last summer. And I can tell you, I mean, it's in a horrible state because there's never been investment there. You know, a lot of the young people, they tried to take me to where it smelled like detergent.
Oh my God.
And I was saying, you know, why does this smell so good in here? Did you clean up for me? So they finally took me to one of the more secure units up there, and I got to see for myself. You know, there were a lot of young people with promise in there. I just want to say that to start off, because we always have this depiction of people in jail that are horrible, and maybe some of those people were. But let me say this, I do think the structure is too tall for Queens Boulevard. I think that there are going to be there's just an immense amount of challenges. I am listening more. I'm actually trying to get out to Kew Gardens to go to one of the meetings so I can hear from the public a little bit more on it. But I think the plan was flawed from the beginning, because you have to have community input. And I actually took a federal prison in my district, unfortunately, about 10 years ago. We marched against it for it feels like 5 years. We marched against that prison because the federal government put that in our district without even a conversation. And we found out about it only because a neighbor saw them working on the building. They never had a conversation with us. I do want to say it's been secure. We're not happy it's there though. You know, I mean, no one wants a jail.
Don't you think it would be better though to rehabilitate Rikers? I mean, why can't it be rehabilitated? You know, why can't they modernize it? Why can't they change the
Build a
structure
courthouse
there? It's already there, instead of moving it into, and the expense to build all these jails and everything could be put to better use in rehabilitating Rikers.
So I'm just gonna end on this. There's definitely a truth in that. You know, there's definitely some truth in what you're saying. You know, is there a way to modernize that specific facility? There are other challenges as well, because you do have a lot of corruption. I mean, I'm not saying all corrections officers are corrupt. There needs to be more oversight on that island. I believe the Department of Investigations is now there as well, but there's a lot of stuff going on there unforeseen to the eye. I won't give you my true answer. I'll give you my true answer off camera, because I do think there are other interests. There are people interested in that location. I'll leave it at that.
We were told by the attorney that the developers
Yeah.
want that
Yeah.
area because it's by the
So
water.
I think there's several things at play here.
Hey,
Oh,
Hello, my friend.
Next.
how you doing, sir?
Go ahead.
Good on you.
Good.
Okay, question
I
about.
like your hat. Are they winning?
No, they lost it.
Yeah.
Oh.
The Mets are like the Knicks.
yeah, it's like that.
All right, let's not go that far. Yeah.
Our friends at DOT, and on the Transportation Committee at City Hall, they want to build an additional 100 miles a year of bicycle lanes. Okay, now today, a bicyclist was killed because he ran a red light and was hit by a car. We feel sorry for him, but luckily it was not the motorist's fault. They blamed it on the bicyclists. These bicyclists are breaking the law, and the city is doing nothing to reel them in. What do you propose? What would you do to get the DOT to stop making bike lanes until they teach bicyclists the rules of the road? I mean, we as motorists get blamed for everything. They raise our parking meters, this ridiculous congestion pricing, tolls on the bridges and tunnels, everything is being blamed on us.
And cast along.
Why can't we do something about the bicyclists and just say, stop guys, come in, take a road test, show us you know the roads, we'll give you a license, prove to us that when you hit someone, which happened a few weeks ago in Manhattan, You have insurance to cover their medical needs. Why can't bicyclists be reeled in?
Well, there's several things going on right now. Right now, and I just had the police commissioner yesterday at City Hall for the executive budget hearing. And one of the discussions we had was on the collision unit within the NYPD, which we believe is sorely understaffed. The council has called for 15 additional hires in that specific unit to investigate crashes like that, because NYPD, we feel, is sorely lacking in this area. And as I pointed out yesterday, we have seen an increase in major fatalities and accidents across the city, which lets you know. And then a lot of these collisions aren't being investigated the right way. And then also, just so you know, the NYPD is looking at drones to map accidents now. So they're actually ramping up. And they actually did bring us in for a presentation, which I thought was neat because these drones could actually remap an accident. It's very sophisticated technology with them. But I would say on the bike lanes, as I said earlier, everything has to, there has to be community input. And the city, unfortunately, is sorely misguided in shoving things down communities' throats. So I think a real plan, so for instance, I can say in parts of my district, it makes sense. If you're going along Rockaway Beach, there's no place for you to ride a bike, right? We don't want the confusion between cars and bikes. And so there are locations where the street would be wide enough to do it, but we know that for us in Queens neighborhoods, that there are a lot of narrow blocks too, right? So having a bike lane that can create more congestion, right, for us. And it's still unsafe to a great degree because you got cars right here and then a bike lane right here, which is very narrow. So I would say it goes back to community planning, but I think that's the job of the borough president, to make sure that you have agencies at the table. We should have so once a month, I host something just with my district so far, where we bring in 40 community leaders, and we bring in the agencies, and we do that once. We call it the tri-community meeting. We do that once a month. Why is that important? Because it gives the agencies a good idea to have a pulse on where the community is at in different initiatives, and it also enables us to push back. So I think, once again, this goes back to planning. I think we should also not let DOT just dictate what happens in the borough. There are organizations out there like the Regional Planning Association that we can fund studies for. I'm interested in that. I want to look at think tanks outside of the city so we're not so dependent on their specific initiatives, and we can come forward with plans.
But the bike lanes are just part of it. How do we prevent the bicyclists?
Well, there have been crackdowns. No, there have been crackdowns. Trust me, I get the tweets. But there have been, absolutely, there have been crackdowns on bicyclists as well. And I think, it's a challenge. And listen, I don't want to pit one versus the other. There are humans who should know better. We should know better. When I drive into City Hall, which I stopped doing, I actually take the train. Yes, I've had a bicyclist cut in front of my car before, right? You beep the horn. So I don't think we should say it's them versus us, but we need to figure out a medium to address this issue.
The DOT should be smart enough not to put in lanes when people don't know how to use them properly.
Right. I'm going to go to him. But
Okay.
I get your drift.
Question, Abe.
Thank you. You talked about emotionally disturbed persons before.
Yes.
New York City has social emotional learning programs in some of the schools. How about implementing them universally to all the schools?
I didn't even raise this is right up my alley because we had a hearing on this actually. So right now, if you go into the New York City school system, there are 5,000 school safety agents and about 3,000 guidance counselors. So there are schools that literally have no guidance counselors in New York City right now. When you talk about priorities and you talk about students, when I talk about those students who are living in shelters, right? I mean, I'm not trying to stigmatize you because they live in a shelter, but you're moving from place to place, you meet friends, then in the middle of the night, you're shipped to this place in the Bronx, or you're shipped way out near JFK, you need social and emotional help in some of these instances. Some of our children are dealing with a lot of issues that children shouldn't have to deal with, right? So what happens, they go into the school system, and I know I've had schools that have been, that have a lot of kids from shelters. And one thing we push for instance, I just did, put about close to $1 million into one of my schools. They're teaching our young people coding. Majority of these children live in a shelter across the street from the school. But they didn't have the computers and technology in the school. Now they do, you know, so we need to make sure that there, one, are more guidance counselors, more SAPIS workers in our schools as well. And we're looking to push that in this budget. So that is I think, on the education chair's priority list, number one, as Mark Traeger. We had a joint hearing once again with the NYPD, with school safety. I have oversight over school safety as well. And that is that's an ongoing conversation right now, and we're hoping to make a dent in that when we pass the budget on July 1st.
Right, but it's not exactly, what you're saying is very valuable, but it's not just guidance counselors, it's social emotional learning programs.
Right. So let me go into that.
Right.
So that's a bit on the chancellor, and I believe this curriculum is already, I believe, in every school now.
No, not in every school.
If you know of a school it's not in, but I know we are that's a big push on the chancellor's side and our side as well. But part of that also comes with the need to make sure that we also do have more counselors and social workers in our schools as well. We are sorely lacking in that area.
Okay, all right.
I think I have one more. Oh, Richie!
Clipboard.
I want to say kudos to you, Donovan. I didn't think in my lifetime I'd hear anybody being brave enough to get behind community trust. When I worked with Raquel and Picture the Homeless.
Oh, right. They Picture the Homeless started this.
It was
Yeah,
just,
they were one of the first people.
it's
Yeah.
really from ground up
Yep.
type of thing without speculators, so kudos to you, sir.
That's all you had to say today? It's great. Love you, Richie. Thank you all for having me. Thank you. Thank you.